Morning, everyone. I think by now we all understand the context for this session. I'm just amazed to think about the past week in our country and what has transpired. We have gotten through the primary season, and now we're in the final lap of this historic presidential race. But in 1 week, 1 week alone, what have the headlines said to us? Gas prices have soared. The stock market, not surprisingly, has tumbled. Housing prices have declined. And the Senate debated, not successfully, but for the first time they debated meaningful climate legislation. These are interesting times in which to live. And the next administration and Congress, to put it mildly, is going to have their hands full. So that's what we're about today. To inform what comes next, we launched the Blueprint for American Prosperity 8 months ago with a clear message. The path to economic recovery and long-term prosperity runs through Metro America. Our initiative challenges the nation, as Strobe said, to fundamentally alter our mental map, from a union of 50 states to a network of metropolitan areas that, as Michael Porter said last night, are on the front lines of American competitiveness. We are a metro nation, and it is high time to start acting like one. Now, today, we will offer a metro policy for our metro nation, and we will make the following proposition. First, these areas are the engines of national prosperity, and they're at the cutting edge of policy action. Yet, as Mayor Nichols said, they can't go it alone, and they once again require a strategic national partner. Second, our federal government has gone fundamentally adrift and does not reflect or even recognize the changing spatial geography of this country. And finally, our metro nation demands a metro policy. We need to fundamentally remake this partnership, this compact between the federal government, states, metros, localities, the private and voluntary sectors, to unleash the unfilled potential of Metro America, and by so doing, resolve our most critical national challenges. We desperately need, as I will talk about, our national government to lead where it must, and once again have vision, direction, and purpose. We need our federal government to empower metros where it should by being flexible enough to reflect the variation in this country and being smart enough to catalyze integrated solutions that cross jurisdictional boundaries. And what's more, during a time of severe fiscal constraints, we need our national government to maximize performance and fundamentally change the way it does business. So, a metro policy for a metro nation, the time is long overdue. Let's start with our initial frame. Broad forces have positioned metro areas as the engines of national prosperity and the cutting edge of policy action. As we reported in November, the top 100 metro areas pictured here have kept growing and growing to the point where they now constitute 65% of our population and concentrate the workers and firms and assets that fuel our economy. Economists, like Michael Porter, refer to this as agglomeration because the assets that matter most to nations, not just ours, gather and strengthen disproportionately in urban and metropolitan places. Innovation, the new products, the processes, the business models that drive economic productivity, sustainable solutions, and energy independence. Human capital, the education and skills that further innovation and serve as the ticket to the middle class. Infrastructure, state-of-the-art transportation, telecommunication, energy distribution systems that move people, goods, ideas quickly and efficiently. And quality places, that special mix of distinctive communities and responsible growth that is competitively wise, fiscally responsible, and environmentally sustainable. Innovation, human capital, infrastructure, and quality places. These assets and the people and firms that leverage them come to ground in Metro America. As many of the speakers have said, our top 100 metros take up only 12% of our landmass. They're energy inefficient in that regard. And they house 2/3 of our population. They generate 75% of our GDP. And more importantly, they gather what matters. They make an outsized contribution on each of the assets that drive prosperity, whether it's indicators of innovation like patents, indicators of human capital like adults with graduate degrees, indicators of infrastructure like air cargo, indicators of quality place like public transit. These places constitute a new spatial geography, enveloping city and suburb, township and rural area in a seamlessly integrated economic and environmental landscape. In the Chicago metropolis, for example, the new geography stretches from the hustle of the downtown loop to the leafy suburban neighborhoods of Oak Park, to the prairie landscape of Goose Lake, to the employment center of Schaumburg, and to the satellite cities of Aurora and Waukegan. These disparate places, once fully separate, are now co-joined and commingled as people live in one municipality, work in another, go to a sports game or medical specialist or shopping in yet another, and share the same air, water, and natural resources. America's metros find themselves on the front lines of dynamic change, and they confront daily the challenges of the new global order, and they are responding affirmatively with energy, creativity, and invention. Challenged by unsettling economic restructuring, metros are finding new ways to bolster innovation, whether by financing wind energy and fuel cells in struggling industrial metros like Cleveland, or by connecting new entrepreneurs to money, markets, partners, resources in prosperous metros like San Diego. Confronted with a diverse, less educated workforce, metros are laboring to elevate human capital by preparing disadvantaged workers to excel in such global hotbeds of employment, such as logistics in Louisville, or life sciences in the Bay Area, healthcare in both. Faced with rising congestion, exploding gas prices, aging systems, metros are designing and implementing market-shaping infrastructure investments to reconfigure freeways in Milwaukee, modernize water and sewer systems in Atlanta, build out region-wide transit in Denver, and install fiber optic networks in Scranton. And confronted with what Strobe Talbot calls the existential threat of climate change, metros like Seattle and Chicago, as you have heard, are taking ambitious steps to create quality, sustainable places by promoting green building, transit-oriented development, urban regeneration, and renewable sources of energy. And what knits all those policy efforts together? It's their embrace of a new style of governance that brings together city and suburban leaders around common purpose, cuts across conventional lines of government, business, and philanthropy, and deploys systemic market and environment-shaping investments and interventions. Yet no matter how much these places innovate and how much they focus, they are learning they don't have the resources or the powers to go it alone, and they shouldn't have to. The forces affecting metros are the same ones that are buffeting our nation. The movements of talent and capital, or the drift of carbon emissions, take place at the global scale, and they have impacts and implications that transcend parochial borders. A rapidly changing world demands that the federal government serve once again as a strategic, flexible, and accountable partner so that metros can address their central problems, realize their full potential, and resolve our most pressing national challenges. So that leads to the second point. The federal government has gone adrift, and it is out of sync with this new metro reality in America. Now, the conventional wisdom of two parties in perennial conflict with each other may be true, but it's only part of the story. Equally important from our perspective is the sharp disconnect between the dynamics of a metro nation on the one hand and the static nature of federal policy on the other. Washington, in short, is failing to lead during a time of global transformation. Washington is failing to empower metros where it should to reflect the changing and varied nature of these places. And Washington is failing to maximize performance to ensure that scarce resources have optimal societal impact. Now, at the broadest level, the federal government is absent where it should be present, failing to lead on issues of national significance. In prior transformational periods, we had a federal government that acted with confidence and purpose, creating advanced economic sectors through investments in healthcare, scientific research, and defense, extending the education of millions of Americans through the GI Bill, radically reducing poverty of older Americans through Social Security and Medicare, constructing an interstate highway system to make us one nation, one integrated network of markets, and taking bold steps to conserve the nation's natural heritage through Teddy Roosevelt's system of parks and open lands, and then 60 years later to ensure clean air and clean water. The return on these federal investments, economically, socially, environmentally, is beyond calculation. But today, Washington lacks any strategic plan to tackle the big stuff that is beyond the scope of metros, whether it's burnishing critical assets like innovation in a disruptive economy that has shed close to 3.4 million manufacturing jobs in the past 8 years alone, whether it's building a world-class labor force when the next generation of workers, African Americans and Hispanics, have education levels that are literally 1/3 or 1/2 that of white Americans. Rethinking the transportation needs of a metro nation that is slated to grow from 300 million to 420 million people by the middle of this century. Or reducing the carbon footprint of a nation and ensuring energy independence and energy security in a country that is the world's largest per capita emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, releasing twice the level of emissions as Germany and the United Kingdom. Our competitor nations understand full well that the rules have changed and require new purpose and direction from central governments, whether it be South Korea and Finland's attentiveness to innovation, or Ireland and Singapore's bets on developing talented workers, or Japan and Germany's campaigns around broadband and high-speed rail, or Europe's consistent focus on alternative energy and smart metropolitan development. Now, we all remember Harry Truman's favorite maxim, right? The buck stops here. It seems at times that we now have a pass-the-buck government in Washington, routinely shifting the responsibility and, even more significantly, the obligation of funding to lower levels of government for challenges that are simply beyond their control. Now, that absence of leadership is coupled with a failure to empower metros with the tools they need to thrive and build on their own distinct assets. Over the past 40 years, from Nixon to now, the federal government has experimented with devolution, pushing large responsibilities for design and implementation of programs down to states, metros, and localities. Yet devolution has failed to keep pace with the evolution of metros and offers only compartmentalized responses to multidimensional challenges and parochial solutions to issues that cut across artificial political borders and boundaries. In the real world, families know that issues like transportation and housing and education are inextricably linked. In the stovepipe universe of federal bureaucracy and congressional committees, these issues are broken apart and kept separate. Let's just take traffic congestion, for example, which is the natural byproduct of land use patterns that separate where we live from where we work. We know that it is fiscal folly to build or widen roads to mitigate congestion. right? More roads just equals more congestion. The real solution lies in rearranging the location of housing and jobs and building transit to give people more choices, and then introducing pricing schemes to reduce and alter demand. But federal transportation programs offer only transportation solutions to congestion, making fiscal follies the easy, if not only, choice. And efforts to link disparate areas of federal policy, like transportation and housing, run into countless roadblocks, such as headache-inducing differences in grant requirements and restrictions. The federal government has become an ossified network of specialized agencies at a time when most challenges require integrated solutions that join up related areas of domestic policy. Federal policies also reinforce governmental fragmentation. Our top 100 metros may be integrated economies, but most, like Chicago, have an inherited 19th century, maybe 13th century governmental structures that are highly fragmented and balkanized. With globalization, the competition is no longer between all these separate jurisdictions, but with international metros like Shanghai and Mumbai and London and Frankfurt. Cities and suburbs should be encouraged to collaborate, to compete globally, and resolve common problems rather than compete against each other. Yet federal programs and policies rarely encourage collaboration. Rather, federal housing, workforce, even homeland security programs, just to name a few, break apart metros by allocating resources to either parochial city or county bureaucracies or distant and often hostile state agencies, entities that rarely see the metro area as an economic or environmental whole. The federal government, of course, is not solely responsible for governmental fragmentation. Cities and suburbs are creatures of states, which are often reluctant to alter the geography or rules of governance stymied by tradition and vested interests. And localities, as we know, don't always work or play well together. But federal rules and resources make a difference and are powerful enough to chart a new path and make city-suburban collaboration the norm rather than the exception. Beyond encouraging fragmentation, the federal government is failing to maximize performance, and it is apparently blind to the revolution in business practice, organization, and accountability underway in the best of corporate America. It hasn't always been this way. In earlier decades, the typical government agency was organized in ways that looked remarkably similar to the typical state-of-the-art corporation. In many respects, the mass production corporate economy of the 1950s had its direct analog in the command and control bureaucracies engendered by the New Deal and then the Great Society. The past 30 years have told a different story. Remember that great competitiveness threat of the late 1980s and early 1990s that Michael Porter talked about last night? How did our corporate community respond? Well, the best corporations retooled, restructured in the face of international competition. Top-down planning gave way to decentralized, federated systems that rewarded frontline problem-solving and experimentation. And businesses de-emphasized rule-bound control in favor of bottom-up accountability that enshrined systematic measurement, benchmarking, evaluation, and learning. We all know the success of the Austin-based Whole Foods markets. This corporation maximizes performance across its 11 regions and 270 grocery stores by combining the radical autonomy it allows its store-based teams with data-rich and evidence-driven accountability systems so that performance can be measured and rewarded. Sometimes I think Whole Foods should just run HUD. We'll go. The federal government, it barely funds the national census, which is constitutionally mandated and in operation since 1790. It has dismantled information systems. It has degraded statistical agencies. It has degraded program evaluation and assessment, and with a few notable exceptions, most federal agencies have no clear, quantifiable mission and no end game against which to benchmark progress. Folks, this is not rocket science. Measure what matters, track what counts, get what you pay for. So that comes to our final point. A metro nation demands a metro policy, a fundamental remaking of federalism and our Federalist Compact. So we face a sharp contrast. On one hand, we are a metro nation. We're rich in assets, we're bursting with promise and potential, but we're incapable by ourselves of addressing the panoply of challenges shaped by global forces. On the other hand, we have a powerful federal government that is out of step and out of touch. We need to end this disconnect. We need, in short, a metro policy for a metro nation that recognizes and leverages the core assets that drive prosperity in this country. At the core of this is a call for a new Federalist Compact, which has three components. First, the federal government should lead where it must. Global challenges are broad in scale and geographic reach, and they require national solutions. Only the national government can set a strategic vision for the entire country, address issues that naturally transcend state borders, and establish a unified framework for smart private and public sector action. Next, the federal government must empower metros where it should. A nation of our size and diversity displays immense variation. Charlotte is not Cleveland. Phoenix is not Pittsburgh. Denver is not Detroit. Federal policy must enable these and other metro areas to bend national policies to their own distinctive market realities and strengths. And then there's another piece to the Federalist puzzle. The federal government must maximize performance and change the way it does business. It is time for Washington to get smart and become a fact-filled rather than a fact-free zone. Lead, empower, maximize, these are pretty simple concepts. We need a 21st century federalism that marries national vision and purpose with local implementation and invention and couples public sector engagement with private sector energy and discipline. So what does this look like in practice? As Amy said, for the past decade, we've tried to listen closely to what we think is a new class of metropolitan innovators in this country. People who are here today, elected officials and business and civic leaders, university presidents and environmental activists who are grappling with the big challenges of our time. What follows is really the initial fruit of our labor. This is a work in progress, but it's organized along the lines of the four assets that drive prosperity. Overwhelmingly metropolitan assets: innovation and human capital and infrastructure and quality place. As a start, we need a federal government that leads again. We desperately need a national innovation policy if our metro areas and our country are going to stay one step ahead of our competitors. To lead that effort, we recommend a National Innovation Foundation to bring under one roof and ramp up what are now fragmented efforts to boost commercial innovations in fields such as precision manufacturing, information technology, life sciences, and the environment. This is modeled on successful efforts in Japan and Korea, Finland, and Britain. The National Innovation Foundation would create an entrepreneurial hotspot within our government that works with states, metros, and the private sector to unleash innovation in firms across our country. Now, no matter how much we innovate, we must recognize that many American workers will not be able to make ends meet without government help. So the federal government must lead on supplementing wages and incomes of working families. We will recommend a metro raise, a targeted boost in the earned income tax credit, the most successful anti-poverty effort in the modern era It is time to make the EITC go further in rewarding the employment of workers who are currently not benefiting fully from this incentive, such as childless workers, non-custodial parents who still care for a child, or families with 3 children or more. Beyond innovation and human capital, we propose that the federal government lead again as in the 1950s and set forth a national transportation vision that fits the challenges of our time, namely to facilitate the movement of people and goods within and among the metropolitan gateways of international trade and the major corridors of intermetropolitan travel. It is economic and environmental suicide to expect our major ports, our freight hubs, our rail corridors to do what it takes on their own to stay one step ahead of global forces. And it is fiscally irrational and irresponsible to expect that a system of congressional earmarks will get the job done. Our response: identify, map, prioritize, finance, and then implement those investments that will have the largest return for the country economically and environmentally. Take politics out of this system and invest in what matters: intermodal facilities at our congested ports and freight hubs, high-speed passenger rail between key economic centers. Now, smart infrastructure obviously is essential to the building of quality places, another driving asset. But the federal government must go further and lead on climate change and create a national framework for smart and sustainable development. We support either a carbon tax or a national cap and trade system to lower greenhouse gas emissions through market innovation. But we think such a system must fully recognize the carbon footprint of the built environment. The residential sector alone contributes a full fifth of greenhouse gas emissions. That's why we recommend that Washington mandate energy transparency in residential home purchases, promote new efforts to jumpstart private markets for the retrofit of older homes, and build a new network of discovery innovation institutes to scale up ideas around alternative energy. Washington needs to lead again. The days of solutions, though, where Washington makes all the decisions are long over. Beyond leadership, the federal government must also empower metros where it should by enabling these places to tailor national policies to their own realities. What do we recommend? On innovation and human capital, we recommend that the federal government empower metro areas to build on their strengths, distinctive clusters of economic activity that join together webs of for-profit firms, advanced research institutions, suppliers, investors, skills providers, business associations. Whether it's energy in Houston, or logistics in Louisville, or photonics in Rochester, or advanced manufacturing in Minneapolis, or life sciences in Boston. As Michael Porter said last night, the list goes on and on of these distinctive clusters that fuel these metropolitan economies. These clusters are the foundations of metro competitiveness and the foundation of the nation's ability to compete globally. We will thus recommend a new cluster effort: competitive leadership in the United States through economic regions. Competitive leadership in the United States through economic regions. I'll tell you, I spend most of my time coming up with acronyms. For the investors in this room, this is what you're getting for your money. But anyway, a new cluster effort to reward metro-grown initiatives that help economic sectors undertake common efforts on job training, product and service innovation, networking, and global marketing. Workers benefit, firms benefit, metros benefit, and obviously the country benefits, since the country is just the aggregate of these metro economies. On infrastructure and quality places, we recommend that the federal government empower metros by issuing a sustainability challenge. And Mayor Nichols mentioned this. Just imagine if the federal government said to Greater Seattle, or Greater Denver, or Greater Dallas, or Greater Cleveland, show us a plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and lower your carbon footprint from combined changes in housing, transportation, economic development, land use, and energy, and we will provide additional resources as well as new powers to align disparate federal programs. We think metro areas would rise to such a challenge. They might propose to concentrate mixed-use facilities and mixed-income housing around transit stations. Or they might decide to institute congestion pricing or extend transit and commuter rail. These efforts would actually give residents what they want, more choices in where they live and how they move around their communities. And let's face it, with rising gas prices and the climate threat, sprawl is no longer an option for people or places. Now, these and other empowerment proposals would flip traditional federal practice on its head. They would embrace solutions that are bottom-up, reflecting local variation, joined up, rewarding problem-solving across stovepipe bureaucracies, and then suited up for global competition, insisting that cities and suburbs work together on issues that obviously cross jurisdictional lines. So that brings us to the other part of the compact, namely the need to maximize performance of this vast partnership we have in the United States between the feds and the states and the metros and the localities and the private and voluntary sectors. Our most basic recommendation here is simple, it's relatively cheap, it's doable, and it's transformative. Set audacious goals for the country. Use evidence to make decisions. Track performance continuously. And in a phrase, get smart. Let's create that intricate network of data, metrics, analytic tools used in Europe and American corporations and measure what really matters. The performance of clusters that drive metro economies, the share of our high school graduates who move on to 1-, 2-, and 4-year degrees, the economic and environmental returns on transportation investments, the changing carbon footprint of our metropolitan areas. Ask any corporation. Information moves markets. Information creates wealth. A relatively small federal investment in the tens of millions will ultimately mean that public and private sector investments in the hundreds of billions can be smart and strategic. These are the policy ideas we have today to lead, empower, and maximize performance. But our work, yours and ours, is not done. We intend to continue throughout this year and next to offer concrete legislatable ideas on additional challenges that we know face our nation and our metros, and that Mayor Nichols and Mayor Nutter and Michael Porter all talked about, particularly the challenges that continue to undermine performance in urban and inner suburban school districts and post-secondary education. As with our current efforts, we hope that we won't do this alone, but rather in concert with the real experts in this country, the metropolitan corporate, civic, political, university, and environmental leaders who are driving change. So let me end where I began. The United States enters a new century with a new geography and a new face. We are no longer Jefferson's nation of rural hamlets and small towns with economies that are internally focused and self-reliant. We have emerged as the world's preeminent economic power precisely because we are now a network of metropolitan areas that are integrated and connected with their sister economies across the globe. Our challenge is to get comfortable in our new metropolitan skin and alter the way we govern so that our metro communities can achieve their fullest potential as our engines of national prosperity. Quite simply, we have come to a point in our nation's evolution when the purpose of national policy and the roles and relationships between different levels of government and the private sector need to be fundamentally re-examined and then remade. Our metro nation demands a metro policy. Together, let's make it happen. Thank you very much.